All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming and hanging out. Good morning, good afternoon. I see a whole bunch of waves over there. Started by Kevin. So this is my first time streaming. So I'm probably going to mess something up. If you can't hear me or whatever, let me know. But basically, we're just going to kind of take this whatever direction we want to go. I'm really excited about the AssetMaper stuff. It's just super cool. So I thought, let's convert the Symfony demo and kind of see what happens. And I have not practiced any of this, so we're just going to kind of hit bugs, hit errors, and if you have questions, we can go sideways. If we have ideas, if you have ideas on how to do something, like throw the ideas out there. I'm going to try to keep track of the chat here a little bit. Best I can. We'll see. We'll see what happens, all right? So, as I mentioned, I have done no homework before this, so we're just going to see what happens. And in fact, I'm not even on the right project here. So here we go, Symfony demo. And actually, maybe somebody can tell me. I have this chat over here. I don't want to lose the chat. Ooh, can I hit this? If you guys can't see what I'm doing, I'm just basically looking to see if I can get the chat in a spot that bothers me more so I can actually see it. That's fine. I'll just go back and check it out. All right, cool. So, Symfony demo. Let's get this thing pulled down here. So, Symfony demo, I kind of know the Symfony demo. Javier works on it, so I don't work on it that much. You guys get to see also how I organize my computer, and you guys can tell me better ways to organize my stuff after or during this. So say I have an open source directory with about 1,000 things in it. So let's clone the demo. In fact, let's change that to Symfony demo. Derp danger zone. Pretty sure that is an old GitHub automatically named project. I have no idea what it is. All right, and let's get this opened in PHP Storm. I love using that pstorm shortcut if you guys don't use that. And all right, that's loading up. You guys see that down there? I had that little Mario. That's a plugin somebody told me about. Like my loading screen is a little Mario. I always think of Marco whenever I see that. All right, cool. So let's see how we have our windows organized here. Let's get rid of that project. Awesome. All right, I got you guys here. Yeah, somebody said pop-out chat. I don't know how to do the pop-out chat. I should tell you, I'm using OBS for this if you have done streaming before. So that's something I'll have to look at for next time so I can actually have this chat in front of me and not just hiding. Actually, I wonder if I can track it on my phone. That would be sweet. Bear with me here. I'm going to share this with myself. Cool. You guys are seeing live debugging happening here. Paste and go. Handy dandy phone here. Cool. Let's see if I can check out the chat on here. I don't want to hear myself. Oh, cool. Everett, you told me about the pop-out chat. I tried that. It gets me my own window, but maybe it's just the way I use Mac because I swap between things like different workspaces like this. So I have my chat kind of stuck over here even though it's popped out. But I have chat now next to me, Trusty right here, so I can see what you are all seeing. All right, so let's get to work. We are going to destroy Webpack Encore inside of here. So we're just gonna kind of start by just like breaking things. So package.json and package.lock, I'm gonna delete both of those. We are gonna be re-adding a lot of these packages because a lot of these are front-end packages that are actually being used by this project. So a more responsible thing would be to keep this for reference, but instead we're just gonna totally blow it up. So those are gone. I don't even have a node modules directory. In the demo, the public build directory is committed just for simplicity. So let's go ahead and delete that. And I guess we should get the project actually running too. So I'm gonna run Symfony serve on some random port. I always have about 100 projects running. So let's try that on port 9062. It's warning me about PHP version. That's fine. Cool. We got to get Composer running. Yes, we are destroying Webpack Encore. Wahaha. You can totally keep using it. We'll keep supporting it, but like the AssetMaper stuff is way more fun. And ta-da! There we go. This is a step in the right direction. Could not find the entry points for Webpack because we just deleted them. So this is coming from base.html.twig. Come on. Does anybody else get that loading thing? I've gotten this just the past maybe 1 or 2 versions of PHP Storm. Sometimes when I open a directory, it says loading, like it's working really, really hard to figure out what files are inside of that directory. Yeah, you do, Kevin? Yeah, somebody, I don't know what's, I'm actually happy to hear that. I thought maybe my hard drive was going weird. All right, so let's see here. All right, so these Encore entry link tags, that's what's giving us that error. So we're gonna get rid of that. These are just more things that are part of Encore, and there we go. So now we're kind of back to base. So we have a functional web application. We have no CSS, we have no JavaScript inside of here at all. Nothing's happening. So this is this is kind of our good starting point. Now, look, one of the, probably some people have done things with AssetMaper, maybe some haven't. One of the really cool things about AssetMaper is that it's not cool. It's just using your browser. Your browser is now smart. So before I do anything else, I just want to show you what it looks like to use just normal JavaScript, not with AssetMaper. So for example, in the public directory, let's create a new file called foo.js. And inside, let's create another one here called bar.js. Man, those are not creative names. And inside bar.js, let's export a function. So I'm gonna code in here just like we would do in Webpack Encore. So I can export default function, message, and we'll console.log message. So bar.js is just exporting just this function right here. And oh, hey, Diego's here. Hey, Diego. Diego's gonna be at the conference. He's giving a workshop as well. He lives in Mexico, so this is early for him. So I'm impressed. All right, so inside of foo, let's do import log message from /bar.js. Cool, so there's nothing special about this. One thing you'll notice is that I did the bar.js. This is, I guess, the idea of keeping the extension off was something that Node created. They said, hey, we're writing in JavaScript, so like you don't need to have the .js at the end of the file name. But in sort of official JavaScript, that isn't a thing. And so that's probably like one of the biggest differences you'll see when you're using AssetMaper and the whole new way of doing things is you will have the .js on the end of your file names. In fact, when I upgraded, it's not on production yet, but I upgraded Symfony casts from Encore to AssetMaper, and that was probably the biggest change in there. I had to write like a regular expression that went into my assets directory, found all my imports that were relative, but didn't have a .js on the end, and add the .js on the end. So that's probably like the biggest chore if you're gonna upgrade something, and I guess we're gonna do that today. And let's just log message. Hello, modules. So if you don't know, like this way of programming with imports and exports, which is not new, hopefully to most of us, are called JavaScript modules. So when you hear JavaScript modules, it's just a fancy way of saying, oh, those JavaScript files that use import and export. So nothing too special about them. Anyway, we have these inside of our public directory. So what you can do without any tooling, you can just open an HTML file and do this, is you can create a script tag and say type equals module, That's kind of the key there. This kind of tells it that you're going to be in a module system. And suddenly you can use import statements from right here. So we can actually say, I'll just say import / foo.js. And that should be it. So let's go over here. I didn't practice this, so we'll see what breaks. Actually, I have a bunch of you, so if I mess something up, you guys can tell me. There we go. Hello modules. So that's it. So like the page renders, and it sees this script type equals module right here, and it just works. You can write import statements. It makes a request to / foo.js. In foo.js, we import bar.js. Like this just works. So that's like the biggest thing here is browsers just support this. And so that kind of is one of the biggest reasons that we don't need to have something like Webpack Encore anymore. The other kind of big thing, no, I'll show that later. I was going to talk about import maps, but we'll just see those. Import maps are just like they're almost like use statements. Import maps allow you to do things like just say import bar. So I said I wasn't going to talk about import maps, and here we go. So if I just say import bar right there, that's going to give me an error because it's going to be like, hey, I don't know what bar means. So this is a really common error you'll see with the new way of doing things, AssetMaper. Failed to resolve module specifier bar. So it's like, dude, I don't know what bar means. And so it's kind of hinting that, hey, if you're trying to reference a file, like a relative file, you should use // or //. But what import maps allow you to do is kind of, it's a map. You can basically map bar to whatever you want. So it looks like this script. I don't think I've ever written one of these by hand. So watch, actually, it's JSON, so I'm going to totally mess this up. Well, even if I mess this up, because I've never actually written one of these by hand, I've only generated them. We should be able to get the idea. So let's say bar, and we'll say /bar.js. Maybe that'll work. Let's find out. It totally does not. Invalid JSON, because I like trailing slash. Don't worry, we're not going to write those by hand. There we go. Hello modules. It works. So it's that simple. Like now it sees the bar inside of our import. It's like, I don't know what that is. So it goes on the page, finds bar in this import map thing, and then it knows where the file is. And like that's basically the new magic of the internet. So let's get rid of all this stuff. And let's see if we can start putting some pieces back together. All right, so we still have Encore installed. Actually, you know what else I need to do? We need to do some upgrading. This is probably on 6.3 still. Yeah, so this is using Symfony 6.3. We need to use Symfony 6.4. A lot of AssetMaper existed in 6.3, but we added a lot of new features and new ways of doing things. So you'll want to skip straight to 6.4 if you're using AssetMaper for the first time. So we're just going to change all the 6.3s to 6.4s. That should be fine. And there's one more spot down here, 6.4 point star. And let's check the minimum stability. Let's change this minimum stability to beta, because right now we have Symfony 6.4 beta 2. Let's see what happens. The composer up with no arguments. Hey, awesome. We just upgraded from Symfony 6.3 to Symfony 6.4, and nothing broke. Woo! All right, now let's see here. You know what? Let's actually do a couple of commits here. Grading, AssetMaper, create a new branch. Yeah, we deleted a bunch of files. That all looks good. Git add-u. Removing Encore and upgrading to 6.4. All right. Let's see. And now we've done that. Got all those typos. Fun fact, we get to edit out all of my typos on the screencasts. So let's see. Quick tip from Water. Before a release, dev is always more stable than pre-release. That's actually a really good point. Actually, let's do that. No stability dev. So So I'm on dev, but I'm still using 6.4. So this is going to be 6.4 dev. And the reason Water said that is because if we're at beta 2, the only thing that's going to be on like the 6.4 branch that's not on beta 2 are going to be like bug fixes. In fact, I had a bug fix or two that I did last week that got into beta 2. So let's do one more composer up. And that actually gave me nothing because I probably need to have 6.4 point star. I'm not that worried about it though. All right, so let's remove Encore. So composer remove, Symfony Webpack Encore bundle. We've already removed Encore itself because we deleted the package.json file, so that's gone. All right, cool. Now the recipe for Webpack Encore is what gives us our assets, app.js, assets, bootstrap.js. You probably don't want to delete those files because they'll probably have custom stuff in them. So I'm actually going to, let's undo everything in that directory. But everything else looks good. We're deleting Webpack file, config file bundles. So gitignore, our gitignore is going to be different. That gitignore was what, probably like node modules. Yep, we don't need that anymore. So let's also commit that. Okay. Now I think we look good. Cool. All right, let's start putting the pieces back together here. So step one is, not surprisingly, we are going to install, AssetMaper. AssetMaper and Webpack Encore bundle are two tools that you'll have one or the other. You'll either have Encore bundle or you'll have AssetMaper because they basically are different build systems. They both have similar recipes. If you install Encore bundle, that'll actually give you files like we just saw a second ago, like assets, app.js, assets, bootstrap.js. When you install AssetMaper, you'll get some of those same files. So we won't see that here because we already had those files, but you'll get your kind of basic assets directory bootstrapped when you install AssetMaper the same way as when you install Encore bundle. So let's look at that. Let's see if that recipe did anything interesting. Ooh, yeah, okay, there it goes. So we have a config file here. Awesome. CSS file, we don't actually need that CSS file. So just like Encore bundle, it gives you a CSS file. We don't need that because inside of this project, we're using an app.scss. So we're going to fix that and get that all working, but I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Where is it? Assets. Is this out of date? Assets. No, there we go. Asset styles. It's hiding. Get out of there, app.css. Cool, 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 cool. All right. And probably the most important thing, let's actually, this give us a few important things. So let's look at that templates base.html twig. So the one change that the recipe made was it output this import map app. We'll see what that has in a second, but I just wanted to highlight that it injected that inside of there. It also gave us an import map.php file. We're going to see how that works in a second and what's important about that. And then the last thing, oh yeah, AssetMaper.yaml. So let's check that out. Config packages, AssetMaper.yaml. Cool, and this is the default configuration for AssetMaper, which just has this paths key. So AssetMaper does two things. I'm not going to turn this hopefully into too giant of a tutorial. I just want to actually code and get things working. But the first thing that AssetMaper does is you give it paths. And these can be anything you want inside of your project. They're just directories. And effectively, anything that is inside of an AssetMaper path becomes publicly accessible. So this is kind of the first half of AssetMaper. And that might seem kind of silly, right? You're like, if I want things inside of the assets directory to be public, why don't I just put them inside of the public directory, right? What's stopping us from just creating a public/assets directory and just putting our JavaScript and CSS files right there? And the answer to that is kind of only one thing, and that is asset file name versioning. So the classic problem, right? If I just create like an app.js inside of my public directory and I point my app at this, the problem is that when users come to my site, right, they download this one time and then we change it. We decide to add rainbows to it. And we deploy this change right here, but everyone has the old app.js still cached in their browser, and it like works for some people and doesn't work for other people, and everybody is really annoyed. So there's no built-in way to force your users to download the new version of the file unless you like do something annoying, right? Like rename your file to app-v2, which is totally insane. So what AssetMaper does is it makes the files in the assets directory public, but it gives them an automatic versioned file name that is based on the contents of the file. So the way that this works, like don't forget about import maps and JavaScript and all that kind of stuff for a second. The beautifully simple, boring thing about AssetMaper is that we can now refer to any of the files in assets and get that version file name. So let's see what I have here. Do I have any images inside of here? I don't have any images. Images are fun to point to. You know what? Let's try this. There's the Apple Touch. So this is the Apple Touch icon.png. Let's actually put that. I'm actually going to move that into an images directory. I guess I didn't move it. I just copied it. There we go. Let's delete the old one. Cool. And then we're referring to this Apple Touch icon, I'm guessing, in the base layout. Or it's actually just named that automatically. Somebody tell me, is that like a magic file name like favicon.ico? I feel like I always refer to those manually, but that's fine. Let's see, how do I do that? There's a way to do that. Apple Touch tag. Let's debug things. Oh boy, that's a terrible. Of course, because Apple Touch tag is a thing. Apple Touch icon, this is what I want. Browsers discovered automatically. Isn't there always also a way to point to it specifically? Header HTML. There we go. This is what I'm looking for. So they'll discover it automatically, but if you want to be complicated like me and give it a fancy file name, then you can override it, and that's what we're going to do. Cool. All right, so the way that we can refer to this file name publicly is with the good old-fashioned asset function, and it's just going to be the name of the file relative to our directory. So remember, in AssetMaper, we're exposing assets as a directory that we want to expose publicly. So that means if we want to refer to something inside of here, it's going to be images/appletouchicon.png. So let's try images/appletouchicon.png, and that should be it. Technical question for later. How does it work with AssetMaper? Yeah, definitely ask that whenever you want. Bump, 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 bump. All right, cool. Ignore these types of things. There's some magic already happening with our JavaScript files almost on accident, so don't worry about those errors yet. What I want to see inside of here, we inspect it, is look in our head, and ta-da! So there's our Apple Touch icon right there, and look at that. It's got this long versioned hash name. So like this is the first thing that AssetMaper does. It's super useful, but it's like not that fancy, or it's just something you need. We need to have the ability to just have version file names. If we change that image, this is going to update automatically. So you just kind of get that for free, and it's super cool, and it's super important, and we don't need to worry about that anymore. So we have a debug command for viewing all of your files inside of AssetMaper. So you can say bin console debug asset. So what this is going to show you on top is it's going to show you all of the different paths that are exposed. So you can see the asset is one of our paths. And also bundles can themselves expose their own files publicly. So this, the demo also has like live components installed. So the live components package itself actually exposes the files in its assets/dist directory publicly, which we might not care about, but that's used to get live components actually working. All right, Hugo says, how does it work for AssetMaper to deal with paths in CSS referencing assets when images are locally hosted in dev environment and on a CDN in prod? Let's think about that. So let's go back over here. Whoa, there we go. So how does it work for AssetMaper to deal with paths in CSS referencing assets when images are locally hosted in dev environment and on a CDN in prod? Well, what I would say about that is one of the things, this is a good time to show it. Let's see here. Yeah. Well, let's try this. So I'm going to create a just a CSS file that we're going to just throw away. So I put it in the assets directory. So this is going to be publicly accessible. And let's say we want to have a background of URL. There is something like that. And I probably need more stuff than that, but let's try that. So one of the things, like same thing with Encore, is that you can, when you reference images inside of like CSS, you just reference them using the real relative path on your file system. So notice I'm not like, I don't know, it's the way it's supposed to work, right? I'm in a styles directory, so I go up one directory in images and then appletouch icon.png. So there's nothing special about this type of setup. You just refer to it the way you should, and you can see my editor understands where that file is. So this CSS file is now publicly accessible. It's not automatically on the page magically. It's just another file that could be downloaded by the user. So if we want to, this is not going to be how we ultimately include our style sheets, though you're free to do this. So same thing, we're just going to do rel equals style sheet, href equals, and then not path, we want asset, right? We use asset and then just the path to that. So style/temp.css. Cool. So over here, ta-da, that works. Let's see kind of like how and why that worked. All right, cool. So just like before, you see that we get the style sheet, its output, it's got the version file name. So that's cool. Love that. And then one little trick that's hiding inside of that file, let's actually open this file in a new tab, is check that out. So you can see that the path to the image was actually rewritten internally to point to the version file name. This is like a small bit of magic that AssetMaper needs to do, because otherwise, right, this path wouldn't work. That's not the final proper path. So in CSS files only, we don't do this in JavaScript files, and I'll tell you why a little later. It has to do with import maps. But in CSS files only, AssetMaper has to actually rewrite this to the final version file name. So to go back to Hugo's question about CDN, is when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, okay, if I'm using a CDN, if I'm going to deploy my assets to CDN, like locally, things are fine. I have my CSS file locally. I have my image file locally. On production, if I'm going to deploy to a CDN, as long as my CSS file goes to the CDN and my image file goes to the CDN, then the relative path should still work just fine. And you totally argue with me if I'm not thinking about something like that. And Paul kind of asked a similar question. Can you also use it while serving assets via a CDN? So the way that I use a CDN is I just put Cloudflare in front of our site, and I'm sure that many of you do the same thing. So I no longer bother with a proper CDN. We just put Cloudflare, and it takes care of it for us. But yes, it's not a built-in feature, but one of the features that we added in Symfony 6.4 is called Cool. Thanks to the community, somebody asked about this after Symfony 6.3, so we made it extensible in 6.4. There's a service inside of AssetMaper that implements this interface called Public Assets File System Interface. And when basically, if you created your own service that implemented this interface and overrode the core one, then you could hijack what happens during production when the files are written. So backing up a second, right now, when we go to a path like this, like a CSS path or an image path, this is actually not a physical file. If you look inside of the public directory, there is no assets directory here. There is no assets/styles/temp whatever.css file. So the way this is actually served is via a Symfony controller. So I don't know if we can see this or not. Down here, I can't remember if Symfony adds any obvious headers. Yeah, this is kind of a custom header. So this X assets dev. This is actually coming from a Symfony. It's actually, you know what? It's actually not a controller. It's a listener. Not that this really matters. Dev server subscriber. Here it is. So this is actually an event subscriber from Symfony, and it actually intercepts these requests in the dev environment, and then serves, like basically finds the asset and serves it. So that's not something that's going to work for us in production, right? Like that works fine for development, but that's going to be way too slow in production. So what we're going to do when we deploy is we are going to run a AssetMap compile command. And this is super simple. This just takes all of the files that are exposed in AssetMaper and just writes them out to the public/assets directory. It also includes a manifest.json that's a map from the original file names to the version file names. There's also some import map stuff that we'll talk about, but basically it just moved things into the public/assets directory. So over here, public, come on PHP Storm, you can do it. There we go, public assets. And there we go. So it's all the stuff we expect. Public asset styles. And there's our app file right there. Ignore the .scss. We're going to talk about SCSS in a second. This project is using Sass. We'll make this project use Sass. It's not using Sass right now. So that's why you see these kind of like raw Sass files being dumped out. But the important thing here, you can see the temp.css. So now when I refresh here, this is actually coming from that physical file. So that's what you'll do on production. So if you replace that core service with your own that implemented this interface, these write and copy methods are actually what are called when you run that AssetMap compile command. So you can actually send them somewhere else. And then the rest of the CDN configuration is just done via the normal asset packages from the asset components. If you have done that before, then you know what I'm talking about. All right, let me actually. And also, if you run that AssetMap compile command, be sure to delete public assets afterwards. This is for local development. If you don't do that, then you're going to keep getting the written out files from there and not new dynamic files. Oh, yeah, lots of good questions. Ian asks, can we avoid inline JavaScript? I'm not sure which JavaScript you saw, but like totally. Like we're not going to write any inline JavaScript with AssetMaper. The kind of funny thing about using import maps and the new way of doing things is that you actually can write inline JavaScript in your templates, and it's no longer a hack. You actually get to use that script type equals module, and there's no global variables. Before, when you use script tags, you would need global variables, right? You need to have like a jQuery global variable that's something else set. With the modules, if you have an inline script tag, there's no global variables. You can just import jQuery, or, well, hopefully not jQuery, but import whatever you actually need. It's best for performance to use the same domain to serve the assets as the application. You can reuse the HTTP connection. That's actually cool. I didn't know that. You could probably also use like pre-connect if you have a CDN, so that can pre-connect to the other thing. But that's the AssetMaper performance is really good, but those are like really fun questions. There's like all kinds of little performance tweaks that you can eke on in the end. Let's see here. Hugo, I think I answered your question already about the background images, but let me know how that gets rewritten to the version file name. Profiler support. There is, as you saw, we have a debug asset map compile command. Or sorry, not this command, right? We have this command, which shows your paths and then shows you every single path that is being exposed in AssetMaper. We don't have a profiler for it yet. We had an idea to create one, and we just ran out of time. So if you're interested in helping with that, Maybe for Symfony 7.1, we could have a profiler that would actually show all of your asset paths and maybe like which JavaScript files are being loaded on the page and why. By the way, there's this concept in AssetMaper called the logical path. And when we use the asset function inside of any template, what we're giving it right here, we call the logical path. So you're going to see that. The logical path is just, as I said, the path to the file relative to the asset root. So since we are exposing the assets directory, the logical path is styles/temp.css. So this debug asset command gives you a big long list here of the logical commands, the logical paths that you can use and kind of what the actual end file name is. And you can actually see up here some of the files that are being exposed by the live component package as well. All right, cool. Let's see if I've caught up or not. Yeah, Ben asked, I think the CDN question is, how do you prefix the assets like you would with Encore? So that goes back up, that goes to asset packages. So you would set a base URL inside of your asset packages. I don't even do this that often, so probably, well, we don't even have that file. I can't remember how to do this, but asset packages, base URL, I can't remember. So the point is, it doesn't have anything to do with, is this it? No, that's something else. It doesn't have anything to do with AssetMaper. It's just done with the asset config. There we go. Is this it? There we go. Base paths. I think that's what it is. Base URLs. Yep. This is what we're looking for here. Because what you basically want to do is you want to say, hey, when I use the asset function for styles/temp.css, I actually want that to render as href, cdn.com/styles/temp.css, right? And this is the job of that base URLs thing. And as long as you have pointed as long as this is what comes out as the CSS URL, once that's downloaded, then the CSS file itself is just going to be using relative paths, so those will also resolve on the CDN. So hopefully that answers that. Cool. Is there a planned way to support subdirectories in the mapper, maybe similar to Encore's manifest key prefix? Oh yeah. So you can only, So you can only serve the other medias from the CDN and keep the base assets icon back on the local machine. Not sure I understand that. So you can ask that a bit more. The CDN stuff is, I can see, this is great you guys are asking it, because I don't use CDNs anymore. So I want to make sure that we have good support, and I feel like we are going to need better documentation on it, because I think we have the basis covered for CDNs. But I also see a lot of smart people in here asking good questions about CDNs, and I'm either mostly answering them or only halfway answering them. So that's something that we probably need a section in the AssetMaper docs. It's like, hey, using a CDN, like here's exactly what you want to do. For subdirectories, if you deploy your app, if you're deploying your app to like, if you deploy your app to a subdirectory, /cool app. So let's say this is the root of your subdirectory. This is actually like where your entire project is located. Everything should work. Your asset function is going to make sure that things come out, that paths come out like this. So everything is going to work the way it should. Like Symfony already knows that it's being deployed under a subdirectory, and so all your paths are just going to be deployed under a subdirectory. In Encore, you had to, set a manifest key prefix, because Encore was independent of Symfony, and so it wasn't aware if it was deployed under a subdirectory. So there was an extra step, but there's just not an extra step yet. All right, Sass compilation. We haven't talked about that yet, but we will. So let's just keep going forward. Feel free to, interrupt with questions if you want to. I'm just undoing some damage here, so I'm going to take off this temp CSS file. Cool. So let's kind of, after that big aside, let's kind of figure out where we are here. So once again, we have basically nothing. So this, I guess we should talk about this import map thing here. So this import map app is going to be the key to everything. This is going to be the key to loading your JavaScript and also your CSS in Symfony 6.4. So in Encore, we have this concept of entry points. And so that basically meant, like, usually your app.js file would be your entry point. And so that effectively meant that when your page loaded, only app.js was executed. And then, of course, app.js would import this and import that and import that and import lots of things. So a whole bunch of things would run, but only this file was imported. In AssetMaper, in AssetMaper 6.4, this wasn't in 6.3, we kept that concept. So what you have here with import map, this app, is actually your entry point. And let's actually see what is coming from this tag here. So this one line here, this import map app, is actually causing all of this stuff to be output here. Now for us, right now we can ignore these module preloads. Those are a performance thing, and we can talk about those later if we want to. Those are good. Those are automatic. But if you actually deleted all those lines, everything would still work. Those aren't needed for functionality. They're just helping your browser load things faster. For us, the key thing here is that this app entry point, the result of that is a tiny bit more to it with preloads. But basically, the result of that is that it adds this script type equals module import app. Big whoop. That's the line it adds. It's that simple. Nothing special at all. Now remember, when it sees app, our browser is going to be like, what is app? I don't know what app is. I'm panicking. And so it's going to go and it's going to look and see if our page has an import map. So the second thing that line outputs, not surprisingly, since it's called import map, is the import map, which is just the map from app to its version file name. And the way that this import map is created is two things. One, we have an import map.php file. And we're going to talk a lot more about this import map.php file, but effectively this is just a PHP version of what's going to be output right here. It's that simple. So because we have an import called app and we point to our app.js file, hey, we have an import map entry called app that points to the public version of our app.js file. And then down here, we also have stimulus already in our app. We're going to talk about like where that's coming from in a second. But the point is we have this key here. And so no surprise, we have an @hotwired stimulus key there. That's actually pointing to stimulus, which is magically downloaded into our project already. We'll talk about how that happened and how that's happening in a second. But the point is our import map comes from import map.php. So the question is, where did these three things come from? Right? So one of the tricks with, where did we go here? Let's open app.js. Cool. One of the things that we saw earlier is that you can just import, like your browser just supports relative imports like this out of the box. You don't need anyone's help to do that. You can say import.js/highlight.js, and it's going to find js/highlight.js. We don't need AssetMaper or Symfony or anybody to do anything to get that to work. Almost. The problem, of course, is that on production, well, not in production, but when these files, when highlight.js is actually served, remember, it has a versioned file name. So if we just let the browser process this, it would go over here and it would try to load, /js. Well, actually, it would try to load /assets/js/highlight.js. So the reason it would do that is because this app file here lives in, its base file name is basically something like this, right? So that's not the real version file name, right? And so your browser is it's gonna be loading this file, which is gonna be downloading this content. It's gonna see this relative import, and so it's gonna say, okay, relative the assets directory /js/highlight.js, and it's gonna get a big 404 when it does that, because that's not the right file name. It actually has a versioned file name behind it. So what AssetMaper does, the little bit of help that it gives you, is that when you use import map and pass it the app entry, it's going to go into app.js, and it's going to find all of the relative imports. So that's stuff that starts with // or // and it's going to automatically add an import map entry for those. So this means that when when your browser thinks that it should be downloading this file right here because of that relative import, it goes into your import map, and guess what? There's an import map entry for that, which points to the new file name. And so that's actually like what your browser is going to download. Side note, super nerdy, cool performance thing. This means that if let's say you deployed this to production and your users all downloaded these JavaScript files, right? And so all these files are now in your user's local browser cache. Nerdy thing is that if we just went into highlight.js and changed something and deployed, the really cool thing is that our file name on our highlight.js is going to change, but the file name on app.js is not going to change, because we didn't just change app.js. And app.js doesn't even need to change, because internally, AssetMaper doesn't like rewrite this internally when it serves the file to something like this. It doesn't have to. It relies on the import map. So since app.js truly didn't change, we're not going to serve a new version to our users. They're still going to get the old version, which is good for performance. Webpack Encore tried to do this by splitting some files into smaller pieces. It would kind of try to group certain files together that it thought might change at a similar time. But with import maps, everything is its own file. And so if you do a new deploy and the only file you change was highlight.js, your users are only going to be downloading that one new file. So let's actually see. If we watch closely here, we'll see if I eat my words. This file name should stay the same. This file name should change. So this is like 12D, A71. Oh, this file name didn't even change. Womp womp. Ah. Oh, actually, let's see. Why didn't that change? Famous last words. Let's see what's going on here. Bum, 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 bum. Let's view source. Oh, duh, I'm on the wrong page, dummy. Of course that's not going to show. Now let's view the page source here. Now I don't remember. No, that's still the old file name right there. Let's actually open that up and see what it looks like. See if we found a bug here. Network tools. We want a JavaScript file. Let's search for it here. We want a highlight. And oh no, it does have its console.log. So maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention and didn't actually notice that it changed the file name. So no, we're all good. You don't see the console.log here yet, only because our JavaScript is totally still broken. So we will see that in a second. You can see we have some errors right here. So at this point, by having our import map app it means that on the page, we are actually already executing our app file. So we import app. That causes our app.js to be executed. Our app.js is being executed, and this file is already running. So let me actually see if we have any. Yeah, how easy to integrate Symphony UX with Easy Admin? I would think easy, but that's a good question. I would think easy. I think it would be very similar to Webpack Encore. You could just override the layout and output the import map that you have, and then you should be able to do stuff. So I don't think that's going to be a problem, but that's worth documenting. And what size of a site would you use this for? If for larger sites where the assets are greater than 100, is this just a best practice? So that's a great question, Brian. This is one of the reasons that I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of blog posts this month and doing this live streaming, because this stuff is not just for tutorials or demos. This stuff is 100% production ready for big, heavy things. And the reason I can say that is because we're not the first people to do this. So the idea of really leveraging import maps and leveraging the browser's native functionality, this comes from the Ruby on Rails community first and foremost, and they use it on hey.com, for example. So I don't have a hey.com login, but if you just go to sign in, you're now actually on the hey.com like Ruby on Rails application, and you can just view the source. I mean, check this out. So you can see AssetMaper is actually inspired by a Ruby on Rails package. So you can see they have very similar looking hashes on there. But check this out. Here's their import map. Yeah, that is from line 28 to 254. That is 230 different items in their import map. And I can tell you without even trying it, actually, let's do it. When I load the page, let's just look at JavaScript files here. Well, I guess I don't have any JavaScript files, but you can see down here, 61 requests. So this is not something where they have tried to minimize their number of requests. They're actually loading quite a few files on initial page load. And it's working. It's been working for years on this like big interactive site that's full of JavaScript. So I'm guessing there's going to be maybe some cases, like maybe somebody's going to come and say like, hey, we load 1,000 JavaScript files on every page load and it's not working. But I mean, I think the limit of the number of requests that you can have and still be performant is probably in the hundreds. So this comes down to something I'll talk about in a blog post maybe tomorrow or Friday. One of the other innovations that makes this all work is HTTP2. So we used to worry about not having a lot of requests, right? We would combine our JavaScript files into one instead of having 10 different JavaScript files because that was faster. And that's just not true anymore. It doesn't make any difference. With HTTP2, you have that one connection and your browser and your server can exchange many different files without a performance penalty. In fact, it can even potentially be more performant because as I mentioned a second ago, if you combine all of your JavaScript files into one piece, come over here. I think I get big when I come over here. If you combine all of your JavaScript files into one file, then if even one line changes, then on your next deploy, you're gonna have to serve an entire new JavaScript package, whatever 300 kilobytes, whatever size it is. With this situation, with 10 different JavaScript files, if you only change one file on your next deploy, your users only download that one new file. So HTTP2 really changes things. And for me, it's been a lot of untraining my mind, like untraining, like I don't need to minify, I don't need to combine those files. Heck, I don't even need to minify the files because all web servers and CDNs and Cloudflare, they all support compression automatically. So you can have your web server handle the compression of the assets instead of you worrying about compressing the assets. All right, what about compiling JavaScript with core.js polyfills? I mean, do you need the core.js polyfills? That would be my question. The most of things for, Most of the features that we used to not be able to use inside of browsers, like the promise object, like these have now existed for all browsers for a while. So this is something that I used to polyfill because this promise class didn't exist, or like weak map, like that didn't used to exist. So there might be some super brand new features that don't exist inside of the new browsers, and then you might need to polyfill those. But I think what we did for a while with things like Core.js is we said, let me use Core.js, and it's gonna like, I'll use Encore, I'll use Core.js, and it'll find all of the different new features I'm using, and it'll automatically polyfill all of them. And I think we need to change to actually thinking, you know what, I don't need to polyfill unless I am opting into some super brand new feature, something that's like just super brand new. It's a brand new feature and only is supported by some browsers, and I've just read a cool blog post about it, so I'm going to use it. And then you would get the polyfill for that one specific thing. Yeah, again, yeah, like Matthias said, this is like me untraining myself. I do the same thing with CSS. Like, I feel like every day there's like a new thing that I used to do some weird old hard way, and now like a designer's like, dude, you just do that in CSS. Like, does it automatically? And I'm like, what? It does? I was writing all this extra code. Yeah, Alistair says, probably useful to have a pre-upload step of broadly compressing the CSS and JS files in public. Yes, but you don't have to do that yourself if you don't want to. So again, we put Cloudflare in front of our site, and Cloudflare does the Brotli compressing for us. And the nice thing about something like Cloudflare is they also detect the browser, and if the browser doesn't support Brotli, then they give them gzip, and if they do support Brotli, then they give them Brotli. And I don't think about it. I just deploy, and something else takes care of it. But if you did want to do it yourself, cool. You can totally do it yourself, like you said, as a pre-deploy step. It doesn't need to be part of your Symfony stack. AssetMaper doesn't need to do it. These just aren't things we need to worry about anymore. All right, so let's see here. So our site is now loading app.js. I guess let's get this stuff working. So if we, as I mentioned, I'm just going to let the errors kind of guide us. So right now we're getting this error. It says failed to load module script expected oh, this is actually coming from the SCSS file. We'll talk about Sass here in a second. Here's what we really want. Failed to resolve module specifier bootstrap JS dist alert. So again, this is an error you're going to see all the time, and this is basically the import not found. So this is saying, right here, it's saying import not found. I don't know what that is. So this is the first time that we are actually going to need to include a vendor asset. So how do we include a vendor asset? So glad that, oh, come on. This is right when we want to do this. There we go. Go away. So the way we bring in a vendor asset is, it's kind of cool actually. You just basically copy and paste, copy the thing that they're looking for right there, run over here and run bin console, import map, require, and then you paste that. Now Bootstrap's a little bit special. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Bootstrap, but this is the process that I go through when I upgrade a site. I'm like, oh, apparently we need this third-party asset. So import map require that. So what happens behind the scenes is two things. One, most importantly, it added this line here. It went out and found what the latest version is right now. So it goes and talks to an API, find the latest version. Here's the latest version, and it added this entry right here. That's thing number one. Thing number two is it then downloaded this vendor asset into assets/vendor. This is new in AssetMaper 6.4. So you can see vendor, bootstrap, JS, dist, alert.js. Now what's cool is once this is there, there's nothing special about it because this is yet just another file that lives inside of our assets directory. So it's going to be publicly available just like everything else is publicly available So nothing special about it. And because it's here, like forget about using it, the very fact that it's inside of this import map.php file means that when we view the page source, we are now going to have an entry for it right here. So the flow goes, our browser sees this. It goes over and finds the entry here. And that's actually what it downloads. Two things about this vendor system that I want to mention. The first thing is that this vendor directory, like Composer, is ignored. And it should already be ignored thanks to the AssetMaper recipe. Yep, you can see right here. Here's the AssetMaper recipe. So it is ignoring /asset/vendor. And it's also ignoring public/assets because that's where we compile our files to. So if you ever compile your files locally, then that's where they go, and we don't need to commit those. So the second question is, of course, how do I get those if I'm missing them? Let's find out. Let's just rm-rf, no, not that, assets vendor. Bye-bye. And we'll go over here and refresh. Cool. And we get this very helpful error. It says the @hotwired stimulus vendor asset is missing. Try running import map install command. So it's like Composer install. It's like npm install. So in AssetMaper 6.3, we actually relied on CDNs. We didn't have you download vendor assets locally. We just pointed to the CDNs. And that worked, but some people wanted to have them locally for different security reasons. And for various reasons, we decided in 6.4, you know what? Let's just download the vendor assets always. So that's what they do now, which means we do need to have one import map install command. It does exactly what you think it does. It just downloads everything into assets vendor. It's very simple. It's not a package management system. There's nothing special about it, really. It's just going down your import map.php, looking for all the vendor assets, which are the ones that have a version on them, and then downloading them into your assets/vendor directory. Other thing I'll mention, in case you're wondering, all of this is powered by JS Deliver. So if you ever want to do some debugging or something, JS Deliver is a great site to do that. So for example, I can go down here and search for hotwired stimulus. So without getting into too many details, this stuff confuses me, honestly. Third-party packages can be written to be friendly to the module world, meaning they use import and export statements, or they could be friendly for like the kind of traditional browser world where they don't use import and export and they set global variables and all that kind of stuff. So some third-party libraries are already ready to use ESM. ESM is the word for ECMAScript modules, so that's modules. And other libraries are not really necessarily set up perfectly or set up the right way for ESM. What JS Deliver does is they are a CDN for every single package on the NPM registry, and they have an ESM version of everything. So when for example, if we import map required @hotwired/stimulus, what it would actually do is it would give us this file right here. And this is actually what gets downloaded into our vendor directory. And it's not very readable, I realize, but at the bottom here, too big. You can see an export statement. So you can see it's actually exporting things. It's using exports, and this is actually what's exporting out. So I just want to mention behind the scenes, JS Deliver is what we're using to fetch the actual packages, and we're using its cool ESM mode, if you will, to actually grab those files. Cool. So now if we refresh, we've actually moved on to the next error. It's no longer complaining. Remember, it was complaining before about Bootstrap JS dist alert. Now it's complaining about Bootstrap JS dist collapse. Now you might be wondering, like, hold on a second, like, can't we just grab all of Bootstrap and then just like refer to different files inside of it? And the answer is actually no. It's kind of a subtle difference between the ESM module way of doing things and using Node. So when we used Node, we could, npm install Bootstrap, right? Something like that. And that would give us a node modules, that's not a word, node modules /bootstrap directory. And that would have like a whole bunch of files in it. And then if we wanted to refer to any of those files, we totally could. That's not going to happen in this case. If you need a specific file inside of a package, you're going to import map require the whole, like the package plus that path name. So what we actually have in our import map is like this file. It's literally just that one file from that package. It's not the entire package. You can see over here in Bootstrap, there's not multiple files inside of here. It's just that one file. And it works great. It's just something that you need to be aware of, that if you're referring to a file, then import map require that entire file path. Now, the easiest way for us to get this working here would just be to import map require all these things. And I'm kind of tempted to do that, but instead I'm going to go rogue. And instead of doing this, let's actually just import map require. Let's just try something and see if this works. We're going to import map require Bootstrap. Oh, so cool. Man, there's so many cool things going on here. Okay. So what I just did is import map require Bootstrap. So that's actually going to give me like the main package. So the fact that I import map required Bootstrap is not going to make any of these lines work, because we now have Bootstrap inside of our import map. And when your browser downloads this file, it's very simple. It's going to look for this exact entry in your import map. It's not going to like look for one called Bootstrap and say, oh, that must be it. I'll try to find something inside of there. It's not going to work. But the fact that we have Bootstrap in here now means that I think I might be able to. Sometimes these work a little bit different when you use it like this, but I'm just going to try. Let's say alert, collapse, drop down. You can see I'm getting autocomplete from that, which is awesome. Tab, modal, there we go. From, and that's actually kind of funny. It actually wants to try to import it from the direct file. We don't need to do that. We're going to say import from Bootstrap. And let's just delete all of those things. So the only reason I'm questioning myself is I can't remember if Bootstrap behaves differently when you require a specific file versus importing it from the top level. This isn't really like an AssetMaper modules thing. It's just I'm using Bootstrap in a different way now, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get a different result. Whoops. And you can see I'm not even using these alert things, so I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. Let's just find out. It's definitely going to make the error go away. I just don't know if Bootstrap is going to actually do its thing. All right, cool. We're gonna pretend it's working for now. We're gonna assume it's working for now, and because we need to get some other things working. But you can see this actually fixes us. We're on to our next error. Failed to resolve module specifier jQuery. As I mentioned, when you see this error, you just go, okay, cool. I'm just gonna run over here and run bin console import map require jQuery. Boom, that's now in the import map, and we're on to the next error, which we'll look at in a second. One thing I kind of blew by real quick where is probably many of you have used Bootstrap's JavaScript. Bootstrap's JavaScript requires @popper.js/core. Import map is not a package manager. AssetMaper is not a package manager, but it does do some intelligent things. When we import map required Bootstrap, it also automatically added @popper.js/core because like that's needed. And the reason is actually really cool. If we look inside of that vendor file, so vendor bootstrap.index.js. So that's what this file is kind of mapped to. If we look inside of that, check it out. It actually imports @popper.js/core. So if we didn't have this entry inside of here, then when our browser tried to run this file, it would have the same problem. It'd be like, what the heck is @popper.js/core? Like, where do I get that? So it means we need to have that in our import map as well. And that command took care of that automatically. So this is an inner import map. You can see it's downloaded over here as well. It just works out of the box. The last thing is, sometimes JavaScript packages come with a CSS file. And we haven't talked about CSS, how CSS works yet inside of import map stuff. But if a JavaScript package comes with a CSS file, it also downloads the CSS file for you. It doesn't mean it's being used on the page yet. You could ignore it. You could just delete this entry if you wanted to. It's just a convenience thing. And the way that works, again, you can kind of see this when you go to, when you search a package over here. When you search for Bootstrap, you can see, here's the ESM mode. But if you look at the default mode, you can see that sometimes a package will have a CSS file with it. So JSDeliver like detects that it has a CSS file with it. AssetMaper uses that, and it decides to download this file for you. So it's just available for you there if you need to use it. And we'll talk about how you would use that in just a second. All right, we're covering lots of stuff here. Let's see what we got here. Cool. Alan asks, thanks for the comment on minification. So generalization, the advantage to minifying over HTTP2 plus gzip just doesn't do much for efficiency, correct? Correct. So this is a fun fact. Minification does not equal compression. So compression is your web server or your CDN, like gzipping or brotliing. Zipping up your CSS files, zipping up your JavaScript files, right? Like making them really small. Minification is what actually takes your code and changes like, const foo equals bar to const f equals bar and keeps the semicolon off. It's actually the thing that will sort of rewrite your JavaScript and make it shorter. So minification will actually make your files a little bit smaller than compression will, but you probably don't care. If you have a really high performance site and you're making lots of money, you can investigate in adding some sort of a like a minification step to your deploy if you want to. But for the vast majority of people out there, compression is going to be more than enough. And if you go look at hey.com, they do not minify their assets. You can read their full JavaScript files just like they are on their machines when they work on them. So you can add minification if you want. You just don't need it. It doesn't add very much. And again, if you're using Cloudflare, Cloudflare has an auto minification feature. So you can even turn on auto minification on Cloudflare if you want to. Question is, do I download the source map? We don't download the source map, at least in the current version. Good question about that. So that goes back to like when we look at, I don't know if this one has a source map or not. CSS files definitely do. Yeah, here we go. So these have a source map here, which basically show where these files came from before they were minified. We don't download that right now. Maybe we will in a future version. Download that file. It would be easy, right? If we just put it right next to the file, it would be served via AssetMaper like normal. So seems like something we could do. So I've noticed you've imported Stimulus here. Perfect match with AssetMaper. Do you know if a new tag for the Stimulus bundle containing the latest commits is planned before the release of Symfony 6.4? Yes, you've been following this closely. Yes, we'll probably tag it this week. So Stimulus bundle, we're going to use that in a second. It's ready for AssetMaper 6.4. We just need to tag it. We got like the final commits like within, I think Sunday is maybe like when I merge the final blocker for support. All right, status check. All right, we have an error here. Let's see, where do we want to go next? So this is talking about cannot get assets/bootstrap inside of app.js. Let's see what's going on with that. Yes. So this is a good one here. So check this out. So this is a cool thing to see here. So it's basically saying, hey, line 14, I can't find /assets/bootstrap. And if we look, here's line 14 right there. Okay, so it can't locate that file, which is kind of funny because if we look in our assets directory, there totally is a bootstrap.js file. So why can't it find that? Why is this import not working right here for that file? The key thing to notice here is that the error doesn't contain a versioned file name hash. So what that tells me is that for whatever reason, this file here, when AssetMaper kind of like saw this import, it couldn't find this file. And because it couldn't find this file, it didn't add an entry for it in the import map. Watch, if I search for Bootstrap here, we'll find bootstrap.javascript stuff, but notice there's no like /assets/bootstrap.js import map entry here. And because there's no import map entry, our browser is forced to just try to load the path, right? So the reason that this path isn't found is probably something I mentioned earlier that you're going to be doing when you upgrade .js. It's that simple. It's the biggest change switching over to AssetMaper. Add your .js. And suddenly, oh my goodness, do we have no errors anymore? That can't possibly, well, we have this error with the CSS file, but no, couldn't have been that easy. Oh, I think I know what's happening. Yep. We will have more JavaScript errors. So this is actually a good example. So what I was expecting to happen here is I was expecting more JavaScript errors. And the reason is because nothing else. If our browser downloads app.js, it's then going to download this flatpicker.js. And this flatpicker is relying on a third-party library, which we totally do not have yet. So we're going to have to add that in a second. The reason that we didn't see that error is because when you have a JavaScript error with modules in the module environment, your module environment crashes. This is like done this way on purpose. So the fact that we had an error when loading app.js, and it's kind of unfortunate, the error doesn't really show the stack trace here, but this failed to load module script, expected a JavaScript module script, but the server responded with a MIME type of text/HTML. This is happening when it tries to download this .scss file. This is coming from this line right here. So the point is, while processing app.js, it fired off a request for this file. This was not what our browser expected, and so it actually crashed and stopped the process. So that's why we're not seeing kind of future errors. So let's talk about how CSS works inside of this entire system. So AssetMaper tries to stick to standards as much as possible, but there is no support for importing CSS files from inside of a JavaScript. So what I mean is, like, when you're importing something inside of here, it must be a JavaScript file. There is no way to import anything else. And that is different from Encore. Encore kind of spoiled us, and it let us like import all kinds of things. We could import CSS files and those types of things. There is some experimental support. I can't even remember the syntax for it, but it's like something like import CSS content from this assert CSS. There we go, something like that. Oh, there we go. It's some crazy thing like that. That's still very much a draft thing, so it's not something that we have access to today. So we did add one feature to AssetMaper in AssetMaper 6.4 that just does not exist normally in the browser, and that is the ability to import CSS files. So I'm actually going to, oh, Leanna's AirPods are nearby. Boop. I'm actually going to delete this line real quick. And let me think here. Yeah, let's just do this. Well, okay, maybe not. Maybe I won't delete it. Let's go back to our temp.css. So forget Sass for a second. Let's just body. Come on, there we go. Let's do a nice purple background. How's that? Cool. Okay, so I just finished telling you that you cannot import CSS files. It's not allowed. And yet we're about to do it. Yay! Ta-da! Purple background. So let's figure out what the heck just happened with that. So again, this is something we added on top of the import map system. It doesn't exist inside the import map system, but it just seemed so darn important because it's really convenient to be able to import CSS files from different JavaScript files. So the way this works, well, actually, first let me show you the source code. Let's close a couple things. This outputs as a normal, boring link tag. It's right there. So this does not work by JavaScript somehow injecting that CSS file into the head tag. That wouldn't work because then you wouldn't have the CSS at first until your JavaScript loaded, and then like you'd have like this unstyled page, and then suddenly it would become styled. Like we need a real link tag. So this does render as a real link tag. So the way it works is that in base.html twig, because our import map is for the app entry, it goes into app.js, and it finds all imports inside of here for CSS files. And it's literally, if I remember correctly, it's imports that end in .css. And it's not just this file. Like if this flat picker, check this out. This flat picker imports another CSS file. Once we get that working, that CSS import is also going to be found. So it collects all of the CSS imports, and at the very top of the import map statement, it renders those as link tags. So there's nothing special about it. You can see it's just a link tag right here. Now, the one other kind of like little trick with this is that in AssetMaper, we try to change your code as little as possible. We saw earlier that if we have a CSS file with a background image, this does not want to give me autocomplete. There we go, something like that. We saw earlier that in this case, like we have no choice because this file here is going to have a versioned file name. So this is one case where we actually change temp.css slightly and then output it with slightly different contents. In JavaScript files, we, except in very rare situations, if you're doing something kind of crazy, we don't touch your JavaScript file. Like this is what your JavaScript file is going to look like when it is served to the user. So what we don't do, just because we don't want to, we want to be as boring as possible. We don't want to do weird things and start rewriting your code. That's what Ascetic did. We want to just serve the files as is. So that means that we don't remove this import statement. So if we go over here, let's go to our network, let's search for app. Check it out. Look, there's an import statement in there for a CSS file. Like that should not work. Our browsers should see that, try to download that file, try to execute as JavaScript, and totally yell at us. The reason it works is because of a little trick in the import map. This was Nicholas Grekus' idea, and it's awesome. We actually do output an import map entry for that. And guess what it does? Nothing. That's valid JavaScript. I know it looks a little crazy, but that's valid JavaScript. So when our browser tries to actually follow that import, it does. And it just runs this line of code here, which does absolutely nothing, and it works fine. So the key here is this link tag as output, but then we also add this line here so that if we do have our import statement still exists, it doesn't explode. Now, one other thing that you can do in JavaScript or CSS, I should say one other thing that you can do with imports in general is you can use dynamic imports. This is not a new thing. I don't want to use that. This is something that existed also in Webpack. This is just a feature of modules. I'm actually using it incorrectly. Hold on. So normally we have our import statements on top, right? And these are going to be basically these are all going to be loaded on initial page load. But you can also use import as a function. And what that allows you to do is only load a JavaScript file or only load a CSS file when you need it lazily. So this is kind of a silly example here of like just load it in 3 seconds. But this is going to make a huge difference here. So when I refresh the page, whoops, you can see it's white. 1, 2, 3. And oh, it's not going to work yet because I have JavaScript error. Darn it. You have to trust me on that. But let me show you what happens inside of the page source. That will work once we've actually finished fixing all of our JavaScript errors. Notice there's no link tag anymore. So when AssetMaper looks for the import statements for CSS files, it looks for these import statements. It looks for import statements that are not lazy. Because it figures, if you have an import non-lazy import here for a CSS file, that means you want that CSS file immediately on page load, and so it's added as a link tag. But if you have a dynamic import, that's what these are called, or a lazy import, then AssetMaper sees that this is a lazy import, and it doesn't add that automatically to the page. It just, all it does, actually, it's really cool, is it just adds a, my temp.css, there we go. Temp. There we go. It adds an import map entry. But this time, remember last time it just had like data application JavaScript, comma, that's all it had. This time it realizes that this is a dynamic import. This actually is something that we do want our JavaScript to execute in 3 seconds. So what it does is it actually outputs JavaScript here. And this actually adds a link tag to the page with a rel style sheet href that points to that asset. So the cool thing is, like in 3 seconds, when our JavaScript runs, it's going to try to download this file. It's going to go find it in the import map. And in the import map, it's going to cause it to execute this code here, which is going to add that link tag to the header. That is awesome. So this is like one of my favorite things. We can continue to lazily load CSS, just like we did with Encore, even though it's not part of the spec. And if the CSS becomes more official, more part of the spec, and there are maybe a couple years from now, there are proper ways to do this, then we can migrate our code to the new thing. But right now, this like works awesomely. All right, I've been going for a while now, so let's actually go into like a higher gear here and see if we can finish a couple of things. So I have another failed to resolve module specifier. This is like almost kind of the boring part of updating. This is, I wish Chrome would actually get a better stack trace. I can't really tell where this is coming from, but one of my files somewhere is importing this module. I mean, I know where it is. It's this highlight.js, but hopefully Chrome will get a better error. Firefox actually, if I remember correctly, Firefox actually does give you a stack trace on this error, so you can see like what file is actually importing that. It doesn't really matter though, because we're just going to do import map require. Oops, in console import map require. And this time I'm going to just import these all individually. I'm not going to get fancy. I can do them all at the same time. Cool. 3 new items added. There we go. At Symfony/Stimulus bridge. Cool. This is actually a little bit of a gotcha. So this is coming from our Bootstrap.js file. So this is the thing that boots up our stimulus inside of our application. With Webpack Encore, we use a library called at Symfony/Stimulus bridge, which is a node library. With AssetMaper, you're actually going to use a JavaScript file from a bundle. So you're actually going to change that to at Symfony/Stimulus bundle. If you install AssetMaper and Stimulus bundle into a fresh application, the recipe will give you a proper Bootstrap.js. But if you're migrating, then you might need to change this by hand. And the other thing is, it just looks like this. That's it. So before, I'm going to undo that. Before you actually point it to your controller's directory to say, hey, I want you to like register everything in the controller's directory as a controller. With the bundle version, where your controllers live that's actually something you can configure in YAML through Symfony. I can talk more about how that works later. It's a little bit magical, but that's the problem here. So, and actually, I don't think we even have the Stimulus bundle PHP package in this project yet. It's a relatively new package. The stimulus helper functions, like that use in. Oh, hey, that actually updated the recipe. The recipe actually added the stuff I needed for me. Now I have 2 of them. You like the stimulus controller stuff that you can add inside of your Twig things, inside of your Twig templates. That used to live in Webpack Encore bundle. It now lives inside of Stimulus bundle. So we install Stimulus bundle. It gives us those functions. And it also gives us some code here. Cool. Awesome. And let's see here. Boop. All right, cool. And actually, like, kind of fun fact thing, I know I'm throwing a lot at everybody right now, but when you install the PHP package Stimulus bundle, it has code inside of it that it wants us to import. And so the way this works is like, okay, our browser once again is just going to it's going to try to download that file, like whatever the heck that is. That's not going to work unless we have an import map entry. When we compose or require that PHP package, it actually added a new entry to our import map. So ultimately, what we're really kind of importing here, actually this would work. Sorry, I'm bumping around here. We could actually do this if we wanted to. Yeah, that would work. That's all we're doing right there. We're just importing a JavaScript file from a vendor package. But since I guess that's probably long and a little ugly, we kind of do this fancy thing where we point to @Symfony/Stimulus bundle, and that was added to our import map for us automatically. All right, flat picker. Let's get that taken care of real quick. All right, hold on. I'm gonna kind of clear house here a little bit. So this is coming from this file here. So, okay, we need flat picker. Bin console, oops. Bin console import map. Require flat picker, and we're gonna need the CSS file. And we're gonna need this little L10N thing here. I'm actually gonna not require the CSS files for a second, and I'm gonna see if it comes automatically. Because, like I said, sometimes a package will have its own, it will kind of advertise that it has a CSS file, and so we'll download it. And yeah, look at that, cool, cool, cool. So it actually downloaded flatpicker dist flatpicker.min.css. We are not using the min version over here, but if I just change that, that should match what was just downloaded. Cool. And it's alive. I know it doesn't look good. Oh, and I even have the purple background. Woo! So you see this highlight.js, that's actually a console.log we added to here. So that's actually coming from, that's actually executing. And you saw our purple background came in 3 seconds after. So our JavaScript is executing. It doesn't look like much yet because there's not any JavaScript functionality on the site. Not to mention the site looks terrible still because we don't have our CSS. So let's fix that. And I don't know how long I'm going to go here. You guys probably have better things to do than listen to me all day. But let's at least get the CSS working. Oh, somebody asked earlier about so Symphony UX. Symphony UX has a bunch of packages in it. One of the packages that has a Stimulus bundle. So Stimulus bundle actually comes from the Symphony UX mono repository. And we need to release a new version. We'll probably do it this week with full Symfony AssetMaper 6.4 support. So since we haven't released that yet, I'm actually going to change this to 2.x-dev. I'm actually going to upgrade our composer up. That's what I meant. I'm going to upgrade our Stimulus bundle to the latest and greatest. It seemed like it was working there, but it probably would have. We would have run into problems eventually. Okay, cool. Let's make sure things still work over here. And they do. Cool. If you have been using Stimulus bundle with AssetMaper 6.3, you have this UX controller link tags thing. You don't need that anymore. You can remove that. This is a way, without going into too deep of detail, some UX packages have their own like CSS files that come with them. And so like under this auto import. And so this UX controller link tags is actually how we output those CSS files. We don't need it anymore because they're going to be output just like our normal CSS files via the import map. It just happens auto magically. In fact, I think we might even be able to see that right now if we do view source. Maybe not yet. Enabled true. Let's see here. I'm just going to ice my cache because I just did that upgrade. Just rm-rf. Just to be on the safe side. when I upgraded that stimulus bundle, the updates that come with that are super important. There we go. Yeah. So I had that old stimulus bundle we had was basically not compatible with AssetMaper 6.4. So when I upgraded the new one, I needed to like completely ice my cache. So here you can see this is actually coming from stimulus, application starting, application start. So we can see that stimulus is loading successfully. So this comes from our bootstrap.js. So this is that start stimulus app that's actually running a file from there, and it's loading correctly, and life is good. And if I view the page source, yes, there we go. Cool. So you can see flat picker is coming. And I wonder why that live CSS, I would expect that to be coming out now too. I'll have to check into that. I kind of expecting the auto import inside of here to be outputting as well, but put that on the to-do list to figure out why that's not going. I don't know if that's a bug still we need to fix, or if that's just me being dumb right now and not thinking about why that wouldn't be included. Actually, let's find out real quick. So this is going to go, I'm going to show you guys just 2 minutes of like magic here of how Stimulus bundle loads all of your controllers. So remember, we import this like at Symfony/Stimulus bundle thing. But that at Symfony/Stimulus bundle thing is really just like this loader.js file. So what I'm looking at over here is actually what that file is. So if you looked in your vendor directory and you look for a loader.js file, it would look like this. Cool? No problem. Loader.js. There it is. Nothing special at all. What is special is that this file imports another file right next to it called controllers.js. So you get imports like the eager controllers and the lazy controllers from the controller.js. And if we search for that file, there it is. That file is completely dynamic. So this is actually written at runtime, basically. So it's going to look at all of your controllers that you have in your assets controllers directory. It's going to look at your controllers you have in your controllers.json file, and it's going to dynamically render this. So that's why we have, let's see here, the live controller, which is coming from UX Live Component. And you can also see hello controller, which is coming from our assets/controller directory. Oh, and login controller too. Is that in here? Yep, login controller. So basically this handles all of the loading of these. So if we added a new controller to this directory and refreshed, we'd actually see this file change with that new thing inside of there. So that's kind of like the magic of how things load. Now the reason I would expect the CSS file to be on the page is because look at this. We have an import file for live.min.css. And remember, as I said, we follow all of those imports and we convert them to style sheet tags. Did I put an S somewhere? Where's my S? Where's this S coming from? I totally popped an S on something. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to need to check into that and see like why that's not outputting. If anybody has any hints on that, there's the S. That's not going to fix our problem though. Yeah, that I need to look into to see why that auto import's not getting in there. The import is set up correctly. And I don't, no. Yeah, I got to check into that. We don't need to go on that. All right, let's do our last thing here, which is I want to get our Sass working. So the reason we don't have any styles is that, ooh, line 20 of what, Marco? Let's undo a couple things in here. Cool. So Marco might be giving more details about what I messed up. But this is what it really originally looked like. We're importing app.scss. That does not work because it's just going to serve the SCSS file. So what we are going to have happen is, well, even that doesn't work. No, it just thinks it's JavaScript. It doesn't say, I thought we might output it as a link tag, but no, it's like AssetMaper doesn't even recognize this as a CSS file because it ends in SCSS. So it just like thinks that this is a JavaScript file, and so it does nothing with it. It allows it to be downloaded as a JavaScript file, and nobody's having a good time. And even if we looked at this, of course, it's just going to be like the raw Sass. It's not compiled in at all. So thanks Marco. So this is one of the kind of myths of AssetMaper that we're going to be talking about. And it's not that you can't have, with AssetMaper, you don't need to build your assets. That doesn't mean that you can't choose to add some build things into your system. If you want to use Sass, you can add that to your system. By the way, Sass is also one of those things that if you've used for a long time, you should maybe start to question, because a lot of the features with CSS variables, a lot of things you're probably using Sass for are just done in CSS now. Even nested selectors are now supported in most browsers, depending on if you need to support old browsers or not. But anyways, let's just forget about that now, and let's actually support Sass here. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to, yeah, exactly. CSS nesting is, depends on how old of browsers or users have, but that is now like pretty widely supported. Let's see here. Sass bundle. So we under Symfony UX have a Sass bundle. We also have a Tailwind bundle. Boop. Sass bundle, Tailwind bundle. And so yes, you can use Sass and you can use Tailwind inside of AssetMaper, and you don't even have to have Node installed. Sensio Labs, some of the people at Sensio Labs are also even working on a TypeScript bundle. So I think with this new way of coding, if you're using Stimulus, TypeScript is probably overkill in a lot of cases. But if you like TypeScript, yeah, in theory, we can get a compiler working that just compiles your .ts files to .js files. And then those .js files are served by AssetMaper. So they actually have a working prototype going. I can't remember if the, yeah, there we go. AssetMap. I hope this isn't private. I can't remember. I think it's public. But they're doing some really cool work here on this AssetMaper TypeScript bundle to do exactly that. So anyway, Sass bundle. Let's download that. Probably should have committed before I did this, but that's okay, so we can see what it did. I don't think that it gave us any. I don't think it has a recipe that it needs. So the way that the Sass bundle works, it's actually kind of cool, is we point it at a Sass file, and it builds that into a CSS file in the background, kind of like in a temporary directory. Then when AssetMaper tries to load this SCSS file, it actually magically swaps out the contents of this SCSS file for the compiled version, changes the file name, the public file name, to just something.css, and returns that. So it's a long way of saying that, like, this is how our code started, and we're not going to change this line of code at all. This line of code is just going to keep working. So what we need to do, though, is we need to do a little bit of configuration here. I need to make sure, I need to tell Sass bundle where my SCSS file, my root SCSS file is. So let's do config dump, somebody cast Sass, I think. There we go. It's documented, but you know, here we go. So by default, it expects your SCSS file to be in assets styles app.scss. Oh my goodness, that's where ours is. Yay! So this is just going to work. So this configuration, as I mentioned, is used for two things. One, it's used for the build command you're now going to need to run. So bin console Sass build -w for watch. That's it. So this is really cool. Behind the scenes, it actually downloads a Sass binary. It's a standalone binary that doesn't, like, it's basically it's wrapped up. You don't need to have Node installed. It downloads this and it runs this in the background automatically for you, and then it starts compiling. So we can say we run into a problem with bootswatch dist flatly variables. These do get kind of complicated sometimes. So inside of this CSS file itself, we're relying on a bunch of Bootstrap CSS variables. and also boot swatch. I might need to take a shortcut here. These are things that we can fix, but these can get kind of, oh, these are all CSS files right here. All right, I'm gonna cheat a little bit here. So I'm gonna cheat because these CSS files here, I would probably just, I mean, they're actually probably, well, they're probably fine in here. I'd probably move these into my app.js as normal imports. And what I would do is import map require them. So I'd actually import map require this, so it goes into my import map. And then over here, I could do import something like that, and it would go and get that file. But also, if you look at Font Awesome, they have a different way of adding the Font Awesome to your site. It's called kits, and it's like a single line of JavaScript, and it's super easy. And that's actually the way that I changed our Font Awesome to when I upgraded Symfony casts. So I'm actually I'm gonna delete a couple things. Cheating here. There's a CSS file. Here's another CSS file, which again we could just import map require that if we wanted to. Fonts, same thing. We can import map require fonts. I use font source a lot for those. So that's actually, I'm just going to delete those for now. And we're getting down to here are just basically these bootstrap statements. So before, like you could say tilde bootstrap, and that would point to like your node module / bootstrap directory, and they'd have Sass files inside of there. That doesn't work anymore, and we're not going to like. Basically, in the case of Sass, it's a little bit more complicated. We need to get these Sass files locally if we're using them. Fortunately, Bootstrap's like by far the biggest example of when you need to do this. Mostly, I've been moving away from Sass, but you can actually require. Bootstrap itself is actually exposed as a composer package. So if you really need the Sass files, you can just get them from there. So now, let's see here. I'm going to change this to just like relative imports. Vendor / TWBS / bootstrap. Yeah, there we go. That's it. So let's do a find and replace here. Find that. Or actually find tilde bootstrap. Code is not there. I'm not sure if that's, I'm just going to delete that. I'm cheating, I know. I'll have to figure out where that is later and why I don't have it. I'm guessing I also am I'm guessing that I'm also accidentally upgrading the Bootstrap version. Remember that package.json I deleted in the beginning? I should have looked in there to have been like, what is the version of Bootstrap? But I'm not, just for getting things working. So I think it's okay. All right, I'm just going to restart this. Oh, that's right. And one of them is boot swatch, which I'm going to boot swatch. Where's that coming from? Oh, underscore variables. Okay. Cool. Like I said, I'm just going to keep cheating a little bit here. Because somehow, again, for those Sass files, you would actually need to get those Sass files locally. All right, cool. So it actually is compiling here. What is it doing? Like, where is it compiling to? Like, we don't care. That's the cool thing about this. I think I can do -v and it shows me. -v, it actually shows you what it's running, and it's actually outputting into a var directory. So this is actually the output file here, var/output.app.output.css. So it's actually in our var directory. Guess what? We don't care that it's there, though, because we're never going to need to look at this file directly. But to prove it's there, var sass, there we go. Here's our output.file. Oh, no, we have an undefined variable. Ooh, did I find a bug in here? Because I should see that. I should see that error, but I don't see that error. That's the first time I've seen that. All right, I'm going to ignore that as well, but yeah. You saw a second ago when we were doing this, we saw errors when this is coming out. For some reason, in this case, this error is filtering into the CSS file, but it's not actually filtering into the console. Interesting. All right, let's pretend that's working. It's kind of working, right? Because we do at least have a body before. Oh, I see. This is body before. We're going to see this. I love this. We're going to see this when we refresh the page, because it's going to actually put that content up there on the body before, and it's going to totally ruin the screen for us. So we can kind of use that to see if it's working. All right, so step 1 is we ran the build. We have the build running in the background. Step 2 is we don't need to do anything else. We should be able to refresh and just see it work. Famous last words. Let's see here. Expected a JavaScript module script with a server responder with a mom type text/CSS. Let's see what's going on here. So part of doing this live without practicing is I want to see how things are. I want to like kind of be able to debug things together when things go wrong here. So what's happening here is kind of the same thing as last time. It's like our app.js. Actually, let me back up here. This is one of those moments where if it worked the first time, it'd actually be a little bit easier to see. So if we look at our app.js file, here's the magic that happened. Ooh. No, I think this is maybe a small bug. Watch, I bet if I clear my cache, this is going to work. This might be a bug in the Sass bundle with caching. There is kind of a bunch of internal caching layers in AssetMaper that go behind the scenes. I think that may have just bitten me. Let's see here. Yep, actually you can see it's already working right now. Yep. So man, there's so many cool things I want to show. So here's the thing. Number one takeaway here is that because we installed Sass bundle and we told Sass bundle that this was our main Sass file, when AssetMaper sees this import, Sass bundle changes it to look like app.css. It's not app.scss, it's app.css now. So it makes that change. And the contents of app.css, if we actually go and find app.css, that's right, I'm on JavaScript. It is actually the compiled version of the file. So it changes the public file name. It swaps in the compiled CSS for that. And what this basically means is that in your application, you get to import app.scss, but what you actually get is app.css in the compiled version. Now, the reason we saw that caching bug a second ago is that internally, AssetMaper, once AssetMaper kind of parses a file and figures out what its contents are, it kind of stores them in an internal Symfony cache because it's like, hey, I already like parsed this file and I already parsed its imports. I don't need to parse them again. So what happened there was when we installed Sass bundle, suddenly the contents of this file did need to change because the contents needed to change from .scss to .css. But Sass bundle didn't cause that to happen. So that's actually something I need to look into with Sass bundle. So anyways, I had to like rebuild the cache one time manually there because AssetMaper didn't know that it needed to rebuild this file. So we saw like the old version and things still weren't working nicely. So obviously that's like not exactly what we want to see. I want to see like Bootstrap's actual styling, but we might need to actually live with this for now. Let's actually do, here, I'll go nuclear on this just so we can get a working version going. So if I were using Bootstrap, I would probably not use the Sass version, and I would probably use CSS variables instead. Oh man, these variables are used everywhere, aren't they? They are. Derp, derp. Oh, let's not. I'm just going to leave those there for now. So what I would do is I would probably, I'm going to leave that as SCSS right now, but Bootstrap /dist. And what I'm doing here is I'm kind of showing what I would do if I weren't using Sass for Bootstrap. If I just wanted to bring in Bootstrap CSS, like that's actually quite simple. When we import map required Bootstrap earlier, that gave us this Bootstrap dist CSS bootstrap.min.css. We're not using this yet, but this is in our import map. It is downloaded. It is available locally. So this means that we can import map that like normal. And in fact, actually, I make a couple notes here of things that I want to check out after this. Sass bundle busting cache, Sass bundle build error, not shown. And the last thing was live.min.css auto import not showing. I want to check and see what that is going on. But anyways, with app.js here, Yeah, so we can just import that like as if it were a JavaScript file. And I'm still getting variables not used. Oh yeah, of course, because it's still a Sass file, so I'm gonna have to delete everything. Boom, I know I'm totally crushing that file, but ta-da, there we go. So I just deleted all of Javier's custom stuff. Sorry, Javier, we actually needs to get put back correctly. But here is the end result. I'm still zoomed in way too big, aren't I? It's like, this looks ridiculous. Cool, and you can see it doesn't quite look right because I deleted some of Javier's custom stuff, but like we actually have the working version of this going. No errors. Yeah, no build system. We can just load JavaScript. CSS works. So, you know, when it comes to converting something from import map to AssetMaper, or sorry, when it comes to import mapping, when it comes to converting something from Encore to AssetMaper, which is what we just did, Sass was really the only part that didn't work very well because we're so deeply using Sass. The process isn't that bad. Like, would I recommend it in your application? Depends on how much Encore is bugging you. I converted Symfony cast for the most part in a couple hours. I think like once you know the concepts of what you're doing, like, because that's really what you're doing. We're understanding the concepts today and converting it at the same time. Once you understand the concepts, then converting it is really not that bad. And this is because Encore allowed us to write modules, import and export statements. So all of your JavaScript, all of your import and export statements, other than needing to add the .js on the end of the file names, like those are all going to work exactly the same way that they did before. I don't think I have anything else that I wanted to do. Let's see here. Oh, yeah. What alternatives would you recommend for UX Translator when moving to AssetMaper as they don't play well together? Yeah, so probably like the number one, like there's lots of things where you can say, what about this? How, you know, I do this in Encore. How do I do that now? And I go, either you don't do it or it's just done this different way. It's simple. The one thing that you can't do in this module environment is something called tree shaking, which is where we're only importing alert, collapse, dropdown, tab, and modal from Bootstrap. So Encore would be smart enough to only grab the code for those 5 things and remove the rest of the code from your Bootstrap import that's not those. Tree shaking is not something you get. I think for the most part, like, doesn't really matter. There's not really that many libraries that I use where I'm using a tiny portion of them and I wish it was tree shaking. I think it's a nice optimization, but it doesn't really bother me that it's not there. Now, UX Translator is a package that exposes all of your translations. It's basically built with tree shaking in mind. It exposes all of your translations into a JavaScript file, and then you import the specific translations you want. And the cool part about that with Encore was that it could detect the 20 translation keys that you're actually using, and then it would remove all the other ones so that your users weren't actually downloading those. So I don't have an alternative for UX Translator right now. There's 2 possibilities. One is that we expand UX Translator to allow you to be more choosy with the translation keys you want. So something where you're basically able to say, I only need to export this specific translation domain, or maybe even these specific translations. But honestly, the biggest thing with something like UX Translator is, well, let me back up. With AssetMaper, you can still code however you want. You can still use whatever JavaScript libraries you want. You don't have to use Stimulus. You can do whatever you want. But if you use and embrace the Stimulus way of doing things, then your HTML and all of your translations are going to be coming from Twig. What I mean is you're not going to be writing HTML onto the page via JavaScript. You're going to be making AJAX requests to render a template. That template's going to, of course, render whatever translations you have inside of there, get that HTML back, and pop that onto the page. So if you go full Stimulus, like, you might not need UX Translator. You might not need something like FOS.js routing bundle. I still think that you should we should probably support those because I think people are going to want to do those, but it might not be that big of an issue in all those cases. I'm definitely going big time the HTML route, and I'm actually going to attempt to, well, not attempt to, I'm promising to do it, so I'm going to do it. In December, we're going to do a 30 days of last stack. Where is this? So somebody may have seen yesterday, I wrote my first blog in a while called Last Stack. This is our trending name for live components, AssetMaper, Stimulus, Turbo. This is like this stack that's all about no build. It's all about having your server and Twig render your HTML. And we're going to do a tutorial in December, like a little advent calendar, where we're just going to do a whole bunch of crazy things with AssetMaper and Turbo and kind of show the Turbo way. So we're going to be doing a modal that's going to be actually powered by Turbo frames and Twig components, just to make it easier to render those. Disappearing toasts, that's actually going to be done with Turbo streams. So like lots of things that seem maybe like they go beyond this stack of Stimulus and Turbo that really don't. It's just a matter of learning kind of like new design practices. And a lot of what I'm going to do in this tutorial, I actually learned from some people in the Ruby on Rails community. They've been using Stimulus and Turbo longer than we have. So I went over to the Ruby on Rails community. I watched some tutorials over there, and I was like, there's all these things that they're doing that they're just so easy inside of, especially inside of Turbo. And so a lot of what I'm going to be sharing are just these new patterns and strategies for doing things over there that begin with HTML on the server. Oh yeah, what plugin am I using for autocomplete? That is totally Copilot. So that's AI driven, which I know none of us can do without that now. All right, cool. That's it. If anybody has any questions or wants to hang out or like has any suggestions, something you want to try, somebody was interested in trying like HTMX, which we can totally do, or we can do another time. I'm gonna plan to do a couple more live streams. If you have ideas, let me know. But hold on a second. No, I can't even remember what I was gonna do. I was gonna do some on, I think, Twig components and some stuff on live components. Or we can add a new feature to live components live, or add some new feature to UX, or build out a modal, or really whatever we want to do. So, I mean, part of doing the live stream is to like spread the word, answer these questions about like, oh, do we need to combine files anymore? Like, do we need to gzip them? Like all the questions that you guys were asking. So now, thank you for being here. Go and spread the word, because this is not a cute tutorial only feature. Like this stuff is ready for production. It's used on production in big sites. And that's really the message I want to get out there. But the second part of it is I want to get feedback from you guys, like which parts are confusing, what things are you using beyond even AssetMaper, but with live components or Symphony UX. What kinds of things do you guys want to see? What kinds of real problems are you running into? And, just let these live streams be a way for us to maybe even just try stuff out. If you have ideas for something, we just try it out and fail together. I did lots of failing. I should promote these live videos more. Yeah, my wife tells me I'm terrible at marketing. I put it on the UX channel of Slack. I put it on Twitter. So if there are other places that you think that we should see it, let me know. I'm not afraid of marketing. I just am bad at it. Which is what I'm trying to do with really the next month of AssetMaper. And as I mentioned, hopefully you guys can all help me get the word out. Oh yeah, LinkedIn. I always forget about that. That's a good idea. We actually do we do post on LinkedIn now. Yeah, random's a good idea, especially like 15 minutes before. Be like, hey, I'm gonna stream here in 15 minutes if you want to. Yeah, cool. I'm glad you claimed Nicholas, even though you only do backend stuff. And that's part of the hope with the whole last stack is if you do ever find yourself needing to get into the front end a little bit, it just feels very familiar. Twig templates, maybe some basic JavaScript via Stimulus, and not that much more. So like, I say in that blog post, we want the stack to be something that's understandable by a single developer. You're like, oh yeah, I can do front end stuff, I can do back end stuff. It's all very simple. It's all self-contained. Yeah, Mastodon. I've been bad about getting a Mastodon, so that's a good idea as well. So cool. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out, everybody. And we'll do this. I think I'm gonna do one next week sometime. I think this is probably the time that works out better for everybody. We have a little bit of time where we're hitting the European and the U.S. people. So, I'd love to come to India. I got to find an excuse for that. Yeah, and try things out. So we'll get that stimulus bundle release out this week, and then you can really just try this stuff out. I mean, like if you use reminder, if you do like the Symfony new -- version equals next, like you're gonna get a Symfony 6.4 project right now, and then you can install AssetMaper, then you can install stimulus bundle, and then you can see what doesn't work and report back. All right, cool, man. No technical difficulties on this. Unbelievable. I'm a little disappointed. This worked too well. All right, everybody. I'm gonna go do my real job. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys